I don't want you coming to Parents' Weekend, Grandma. No offense, but you're just kind of embarrassing. Those words from my only granddaughter Zoe stung more than any physical pain I'd ever endured. I sat there holding my phone, the screen, showing her text message while my tea grew cold on the table before me. My fingers hovered over the keypad, uncertain how to respond. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What Zoe didn't realize was that her prestigious Westlake University experience, from the state-of-the-art Heritage Center, where she took her advanced literature classes, to the merit scholarship that covered half her tuition, all existed because of the quiet donations I'd been making for over 20 years. The same embarrassing grandmother she was now ashamed to be seen with was the anonymous benefactor the university president regularly thanked in commencement speeches. But I had never told anyone in my family about my financial relationship with Westlake. Not my son Thomas, not his status-obsessed wife Diana, and certainly not my granddaughter Zoe. I had wanted my contributions to remain anonymous, to help without recognition. Now I wondered if that had been a mistake. I never expected my twilight, years to be spent navigating the complicated dance of independence and loneliness. After Gerald passed away 12 years ago, I dedicated myself to two things: my granddaughter Zoe and my philanthropic work. The first brought me joy beyond measure. The second gave me purpose. My son Thomas and his wife Diana had always been preoccupied with appearances. They lived in Ridgewood Estates, the kind of neighborhood where lawns were manicured weekly and luxury cars gleamed in circular driveways. Diana hosted dinner parties for Thomas's colleagues at his investment firm, always finding ways to mention their vacations to Santorini or their connections to minor celebrities. In their world, I was an inconvenience, a reminder of humbler beginnings. My clothes weren't designer, my house in Oak Ridge was modest, and I preferred quiet evenings with books to glittering social events. But for years, none of that had mattered to Zoe. As a child, Zoe would beg to spend weekends at my house. We'd bake cookies together, plant flowers in my garden, and read for hours on the porch swing. She was curious and kind, with a mind that questioned everything and eyes that sparkled when she discovered something new. When she was 12, I took her to Westlake University for the first time, for a special lecture series open to the public. I watched her eyes widen as she took in the historic buildings, the sprawling lawns, the energy of academic life. "Grandma," she had whispered, clutching my hand, "I'm going to go here someday." Something in my heart had shifted that day. I'd been making small donations to Westlake for years. Nothing extraordinary, just regular contributions as a community member, who appreciated their cultural programs. But seeing Zoe's face, I made a decision. The next week, I scheduled a meeting with Dr. Robert Hayes, the university president. What no one in my family knew was that Gerald had been remarkably successful with his investments. While we lived modestly, we had accumulated significant wealth. After his death, I found myself with more money than I could ever spend on myself. The thought of using it to secure Zoe's future seemed perfect. "Mrs. Wilson," Dr. Hayes had said, clearly surprised, when I named the figure I was prepared to commit. "This level of contribution would make you our most significant individual donor." "On one condition," I had replied, "complete anonymity. I don't want my name on buildings or in publications." He had agreed, though reluctantly. People who gave millions usually wanted something named after them. I just wanted to help build a place where students like Zoe could thrive. Over the years, my contributions helped fund the new Heritage Center for Humanities, establish 3 endowed professorships, and create a substantial scholarship program. Dr. Hayes kept his word about my anonymity, introducing me only as Margaret to the few staff who needed to know about my visits. As Zoe grew into her teens, something began to change. The weekends at my house became less frequent. When she did visit, she was often glued to her phone. Thomas and Diana encouraged her new interests: designer clothes, exclusive summer programs, friendships with the children of their social circle. I told myself it was normal, that teenagers naturally drift from their grandparents. When Zoe was accepted to Westlake, I felt a quiet pride. I attended her high school graduation, sitting alone while Thomas and Diana hosted a lavish party afterward for their friends. Zoe hugged me briefly before being whisked away. "Thanks for coming, Grandma," she had said, already looking past me to a group of her friends. I consoled myself with the knowledge that soon she would be at Westlake, benefiting from the environment I had helped create, even if she didn't know it. The first semester seemed promising. Zoe called occasionally, excited about her literature professor, who happened to hold one of the chairs I had endowed, and mentioned making new friends. I hoped that as she matured intellectually, she might find her way back to the curious, warm-hearted girl I remembered. Then came the Parents' Weekend invitation. I had mentioned to Zoe that I might drive up to see her. "I don't want you coming to Parents' Weekend, Grandma. No offense, but you're just kind of embarrassing." The text had arrived while I was having my morning tea, planning my day around a meeting with James Blackwell, a retired literature professor I had befriended during my quiet visits to Westlake. James was the only person outside the administration who suspected the extent of my involvement with the university, though he never asked directly. Staring at Zoe's message, I felt something shift inside me. Not just hurt, though there was plenty of that, but something else, a quiet resolve forming like ice crystals in water. I typed back, "I understand. No need to worry." Then I set my phone down and picked up my address book. It was time to make a call to Dr. Hayes. The next day, I met James at the Bluebird Cafe, our usual spot just off campus. At 72, James had the kind of weathered handsomeness that comes from a life of outdoor pursuits, balanced with intellectual passion. His silver hair was always slightly windblown, his blue eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "You look troubled, Margaret," he said as he stirred honey into his tea. "Has something happened?" I hesitated, then showed him Zoe's text. James read it, his expression darkening. "Young people can be remarkably short-sighted," he said gently, "and cruel without meaning to be." "I've spent years helping build this place for students like her," I said, "and now she's ashamed to be seen with me." James set his cup down. "What does she think you do with your time? Surely she knows you're not just sitting at home knitting." I laughed despite myself. "I don't think she thinks about it at all. To her, I'm just an old woman who wears unfashionable clothes and doesn't understand social media." "Then perhaps," James said carefully, "it's time she learned otherwise." "What do you mean?" "You've kept your contributions anonymous for admirable reasons, Margaret. But anonymity has its limits. Sometimes recognition serves a purpose beyond vanity." I thought about his words all the way home. That evening, as I watered my garden in the fading light, I considered what James had said. My anonymity had been a choice, one that perhaps had outlived its usefulness. Inside, I pulled out the file of correspondence with Westlake. Reports on how my donations had been used, thank you letters from Dr. Hayes, invitations to private events I rarely attended. I had always believed that giving should be its own reward, that attaching my name to my philanthropy would somehow diminish it. But now I wondered if I had been hiding my light under a bushel out of humility or fear. Fear of Thomas and Diana's reactions, certainly. They would be furious to learn I had this kind of money all along while living so modestly. But perhaps also fear of disrupting the image Zoe had of me, the simple grandmother who baked cookies and told stories. That image clearly no longer served either of us. I picked up my phone and texted Zoe. "I respect your wishes about Parents' Weekend. However, I will be attending a donor event at Westlake that same weekend. Perhaps we could meet for coffee off campus, if your schedule allows." Her response came quickly. You're a donor? Since when? I smiled to myself. For quite some time. Sleep well, dear. I set my phone down without elaborating, knowing the seed of curiosity had been planted. The following week, I received a formal invitation to the Westlake University benefactors dinner held annually during Parents' Weekend. Dr. Hayes had always invited me, though I had attended only twice before, preferring to maintain my low profile. This time, I RSVP'd with a yes. Then I did something else I rarely indulged in. I went shopping. Not at my usual department store, but at an upscale boutique in the city. I selected a simple but elegant midnight blue dress, had my hair styled in a salon instead of trimming it myself, and even splurged on a professional manicure. If I was going to step out of the shadows, I wanted to do it on my own terms. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The evening of the benefactors' dinner arrived with perfect autumn weather. The historic Westlake campus looked magical, with soft lighting illuminating the century-old architecture. As I parked my car, the same reliable sedan I'd driven for 12 years, I noticed the gleaming luxury vehicles surrounding it. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the same insecurity that Thomas and Diana's world always triggered in me. Then I straightened my shoulders, took a deep breath, and walked toward the Heritage Center, my heels clicking softly on the brick pathway. Inside, the reception area buzzed with conversation. Well-dressed couples held champagne flutes, professors in academic regalia mingled with wealthy alumni, and student ambassadors navigated the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres. I accepted a glass of champagne from a young man who looked about Zoe's age and found a quiet corner to observe. I hadn't told Dr. Hayes that I was actually attending this time, wanting to maintain my low profile until the appropriate moment. But it wasn't long before he spotted me, his eyebrows rising in surprise before he excused himself from a conversation and made his way over. "Margaret," he said warmly, taking my hand in both of his. "What a wonderful surprise. You look remarkable." "Thank you, Robert," I said. I decided it was time to actually attend one of these events I help fund. He smiled, a hint of curiosity in his eyes. "Any particular reason for the change of heart?" "Let's just say I'm reconsidering certain choices," I replied. "How is the new scholarship program working out?" We chatted about university business for a few minutes before he was called away to greet other guests. As he left, I spotted James entering the hall, distinguished in his dark suit. Our eyes met across the room, and he gave me a subtle nod of approval. I was just making my way toward him when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Grandma?" I turned, to find Zoe staring at me, her expression a mixture of shock and confusion. She was dressed in a server's uniform, a tray of empty glasses in her hands. "Hello, Zoe," I said calmly. "You look well." "What are you doing here?" she asked, lowering her voice. "This event is for major donors and university officials." "Yes, I'm aware," I said, taking a sip of champagne. "That's why I received an invitation." Her eyes narrowed. "You said you were a donor, but this dinner is only for people who give, serious money." "That's correct." Before she could respond, Dr. Hayes appeared at my side, unaware of the tension between us. "Margaret, I wonder if I might steal you away for a moment. There are some board members who have been very eager to meet you," he said, then noticed Zoe. "Ah, Ms. Wilson, good evening. I wasn't aware you two knew each other." Zoe's eyes widened. "She's my grandmother," she said faintly. Dr. Hayes looked between us, realization dawning on his face. "Your grandmother? But that would mean—" He stopped himself. "Margaret, you never mentioned your granddaughter attended Westlake." "It never seemed relevant to our discussions about the Heritage Center or the scholarship endowment," I said mildly. Zoe was staring at me now, her tray of glasses forgotten. "The Heritage Center? But that's the newest building on campus," Everyone says some anonymous donor gave millions to build it. Not entirely anonymous, Dr. Hayes said carefully, looking to me for permission. I nodded slightly. Your grandmother has been Westlake's most significant individual benefactor for nearly 2 decades, he said gently to Zoe. The Heritage Center, 3 endowed faculty chairs, and the Merit Scholarship Program all exist largely because of her generosity. The color drained from Zoe's face. But that's not possible. You live in that little house in Oak Ridge. You wear the same cardigan you've had for years. Dad always says... She stopped abruptly. What does your father say? I asked, though I could guess. Zoe looked down. Nothing. I should get back to work. She hurried away, leaving me standing with Dr. Hayes, who looked genuinely concerned. I apologize if I overstepped, he said. I had no idea she was your granddaughter, or that she didn't know about your relationship with the university. It's fine, Robert, I assured him. It's time certain truths came to light. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I was introduced to board members and faculty, engaged in conversations about university initiatives, and even promised to consider having my name attached to the new science wing. James stayed close by, offering quiet support and occasionally squeezing my hand when he sensed my energy flagging. I didn't see Zoe again until the event was winding down. I was saying goodbye to Professor Charlotte Myers, whose research I had followed with interest for years, when I felt a presence at my elbow. Can we talk? Zoe asked quietly. My shift is over. We found a bench in the courtyard outside the Heritage Center, the building's warm lights reflecting in the decorative pool before us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Why didn't you ever tell us? Zoe finally asked. About the money. About all of this. She gestured toward the Heritage Center. I considered my answer carefully. Your grandfather was very successful with his investments. When he passed away, I inherited everything. I chose to continue living simply because that's what makes me happy. But I wanted to do something meaningful with the resources we had accumulated. But why keep it a secret? Dad and Mom always talk about how we have to manage family finances carefully, how my tuition is a stretch. I sighed. Your parents have their own resources, Zoe. They choose to live the way they do. The big house, the luxury cars, the vacations. I've offered financial help in the past, but your father has always declined. He has. Certain ideas about independence. But my scholarship, Zoe said slowly. Half my tuition is covered by the Wilson Merit Award. Is that... Named after your grandfather, yes, I admitted. Though you earned it entirely on your own merits. I had no influence on the selection. Committee? Zoe was quiet for a long time, her fingers twisting in her lap. I've been awful to you, she finally said, her voice small. The things I said in that text. You hurt me, I acknowledged. But I understand that at your age, fitting in seems vitally important. It's not just that, she said. Mom and Dad are always talking about image, about how important it is to associate with the right people. When I told them you might come for Parents' Weekend, Mom said. She trailed off. What did she say? I prompted gently. Zoe looked miserable. She said it would be embarrassing to have you around their friends from the Parents' Association, that you wouldn't fit in. The words stung, but they weren't surprising. Diana had always viewed me as a liability to their social climbing. And you agreed with her assessment, I said, not as a question. I thought I did, Zoe admitted, but now I feel like I don't know anything anymore. You're this important person at my university, and I've been treating you like you're... She couldn't finish. Like I'm just an embarrassing old woman, I finished for her. It's all right to say it, Zoe. That's how you've seen me. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. I reached over and took her hand. The question is, what happens now? Zoe looked up at me, her expression uncertain. What do you mean? Now that you know about my relationship with Westlake, about the financial resources I have access to, does that change how you see me? Am I suddenly less embarrassing because I have money and influence? She flinched as if I'd slapped her. That's not fair. Isn't it? You've been avoiding me for months. You didn't want me at Parents' Weekend because you were ashamed of me. What's changed in the last 2 hours except your perception of my status? Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know what to say. I softened, reaching up to wipe away her tears. I don't say this to hurt you, Zoe, but I need you to understand that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account or social standing. The grandmother who baked cookies with you, who taught you to garden and read you stories, that's still who I am. The only difference is now you know I also have the resources to help build buildings and fund scholarships. I miss that grandmother, she said softly. I miss who I was when I was with her too. Those words touched something deep inside me. She's still here, I said, and so is that girl, underneath all the pressure to fit in and be someone you think others want you to be. Zoe leaned her head against my shoulder, something she hadn't done in years. What do I tell Mom and Dad? That's up to you, I said, but eventually they'll need to know the truth. About Westlake, about my financial situation, about all of it. They're going to freak out, she murmured. Probably, I agreed. But that's not your problem to solve. We sat in silence for a while, watching the lights from the Heritage Center ripple across the water. Finally, Zoe straightened up. Would you come to lunch tomorrow? She asked hesitantly. I mean, if you're still going to be here for the weekend, I could show you my dorm room, meet my roommate. I'd like that very much, I said, smiling. As it happens, I have a suite at the University Inn for the whole weekend. Zoe laughed, a genuine sound that reminded me of her childhood. Of course you do. Probably the presidential suite, knowing what I know now. Just a regular suite, I corrected her. I still don't believe in unnecessary extravagance. As we walked back toward the parking area, Zoe asked, Who was that man you were talking to? The one with the silver hair and glasses? James? He's a friend, a retired literature professor. Just a friend? She asked, with a hint of her old curiosity. I felt a warmth rise to my cheeks that had nothing to do with the evening's revelations. For now, I said simply. Zoe grinned. Grandma, I think there's a lot more about you I need to learn. I think you might be right, I agreed, squeezing her hand. As I watched her walk toward her dormitory, her figure receding into the darkness, I felt a cautious hope. The path forward wouldn't be simple. Thomas and Diana would indeed freak out, as Zoe had put it. Years of carefully constructed family dynamics would need to be renegotiated. But for the first time in a long while, I felt fully seen. Not just as a grandmother, not just as a benefactor, but as Margaret Wilson, a woman with her own life, choices, and possibilities still ahead. I took out my phone and texted James. Breakfast tomorrow? I have quite a story to tell you. His reply came immediately. I can't wait to hear it. 9 a.m. at Bluebird? I smiled to myself as I got into my car. Sometimes being called embarrassing led to the most surprising outcomes. And sometimes, stepping out of the shadows was exactly what both you and the people you love needed most. The drive back to the University Inn gave me time to process the evening's revelations. Streetlights cast intermittent glows across my dashboard as I navigated the quiet college town roads. My mind replaying Zoe's expressions, from shock to disbelief, to that glimmer of reconnection I'd seen at the end of our conversation. I wondered if this fragile new understanding between us would survive the harsh light of morning, or if the influence of Thomas and Diana would reassert itself once Zoe had time to think. I'd reserved the suite at the University Inn months ago, not because I expected to use it, but because hope is a persistent thing. The desk clerk greeted me with practiced politeness, unaware of my connection to the university whose name adorned half the businesses in town. In my room, I kicked off my heels and stood at the window, looking out at the campus spread below, its buildings illuminated against the night sky. The Heritage Center's distinctive silhouette stood proudly among them. I thought about how many students would pass through those doors over the decades to come, never knowing the story behind its creation. Sleep came fitfully that night. I dreamed of Gerald, of the early days when we'd lived in a tiny apartment, counting pennies and planning for a future that seemed impossibly distant. "We'll be comfortable someday, Maggie," he used to say. "Just you wait." His predictions had proven more accurate than either of us could have imagined, though he hadn't lived to see the full fruits of his financial acumen. Morning arrived with soft autumn sunshine streaming through the curtains. I dressed carefully in slacks and a cashmere sweater, not the worn cardigan Zoe had referenced, but nothing ostentatious either. At 8:30, I headed down to the hotel lobby, planning to walk to the Bluebird Cafe for my breakfast with James. "Mrs. Wilson?" the desk clerk called as I crossed the lobby. "You have visitors." I turned, surprised, to find Thomas and Diana standing near the entrance, their expressions a mixture of confusion and barely concealed anger. My heart sank. Clearly, Zoe had already told them something, though how much remained to be seen. "Thomas," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Diana, this is unexpected." My son stepped forward, his tailored suit and carefully styled hair a reflection of the image he had cultivated over the years. At 46, he looked so much like his father it sometimes made my chest ache, though Gerald had never carried himself with the same rigid formality. "What are you doing here, Mom?" he asked, his voice tight. "Zoe called us last night, talking about some donor dinner? Something about you funding buildings at Westlake?" I glanced at my watch. "I have a breakfast appointment in 15 minutes. Perhaps we could discuss this afterward?" Diana made a small, incredulous sound. "You have an appointment? We drove 2 hours this morning because our daughter called us in tears, completely confused about who her grandmother actually is." I softened slightly. "I understand this is surprising news, but I'm meeting someone and I don't want to be late. Why don't we meet for lunch? Say, noon at the restaurant here?" Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Mom, what is going on? Are you in some kind of trouble? Did you borrow money against your house? Because if you're trying to impress people by pretending to be some big university donor—" "I'm not pretending anything," I interrupted, my patience wearing thin. "And this isn't a conversation I want to have in a hotel lobby. Noon, at the restaurant. We can discuss everything then." Without waiting for a response, I walked past them and out the door, feeling their stares burning into my back. My hands trembled slightly as I made my way toward the Bluebird Cafe. I had known this confrontation was inevitable, but I hadn't expected it quite so soon. Zoe must have called them immediately after our conversation. James was already waiting at our usual corner table when I arrived, 2 steaming mugs of tea, prepared exactly how we liked them. One look at my face told him something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, pulling out my chair. I sank into it gratefully. "My son and his wife are here. They're waiting at the hotel." "Ah," he said, understanding immediately. "Zoe told them about last night." "It appears so." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. "I'm meeting them for lunch to explain everything." James sat back studying me. "And how do you feel about that?" It was a simple question, but it made me pause. How did I feel? The secrecy I'd maintained for years was crumbling, and with it, the carefully constructed dynamics of my family relationships. "Relieved," I said after a moment, surprising myself with the answer. "And terrified. And angry," in a way I didn't expect. Angry? James prompted gently. That my son and his wife have made my granddaughter ashamed of me, I said, the words coming out more sharply than I intended. That they've taught her to value appearance over substance, that they're so focused on climbing social ladders they can't see what's truly important. James reached across the table and covered my hand with his. You have every right to feel that way. But I'm partly responsible too, I admitted. I've allowed them to control the narrative. I've hidden aspects of my life out of… what? Fear of confrontation? Misplaced humility? I'm not even sure anymore. Perhaps, James suggested, you simply wanted to be loved for yourself, not for your resources. The observation hit so close to home that tears sprang to my eyes. I blinked them away quickly. Tell me about Gerald, James said, changing the subject slightly. What would he think about all this? The question brought a genuine smile to my face. He'd be laughing his head off. Gerald never had patience for pretense. He used to say Thomas got his fixation on status from my side of the family. My father was very concerned with keeping up appearances. And Gerald wasn't? Not in the, least. He wore the same 3 ties for 20 years, drove cars until they practically fell apart. But he was brilliant with investments, with seeing patterns and opportunities others missed. I shook my head, remembering. He wanted us to be financially secure, but he couldn't have cared less about impressing anyone. Sounds like a man I would have liked, James said. He would have liked you too, I replied, realizing I meant it. We spent the rest of breakfast discussing lighter topics, a book we'd both recently read, the plans for the new science wing, James's upcoming guest lecture at a university in Boston. His calm presence helped steady me for what was to come. As noon approached, James walked me back to the University Inn. Would you like me to come with you? He offered as we reached the entrance. Thank you, but no, I said. This is a conversation I need to have with my family alone. He nodded, understanding. Call me afterward if you want to talk. I will, I promised, giving his hand a quick squeeze before heading inside. Thomas and Diana were already seated in the restaurant, a bottle of sparkling water untouched between them. Diana's perfectly manicured nails tapped an impatient rhythm on the tablecloth. Sorry to keep you waiting, I said, sliding into the seat across from them. Thomas leaned forward immediately. Mom, I've been calling Robert Hayes's office all morning. His secretary says he's in meetings, but I've left 3 messages. And why would you be calling the university president? I asked, unfolding my napkin. To figure out what's going on, he said, as if it were obvious. Zoe was very upset. Last night. She said President Hayes told her you're some major benefactor of the university, that you funded the Heritage Center. That's correct, I said simply. Diana's eyebrows rose. You can't be serious. I'm perfectly serious. I've been supporting Westlake for nearly 20 years. A waiter approached, but Thomas waved him away impatiently. Mom, that building cost millions. The whole campus knows it was funded by some anonymous wealthy donor. Yes, I said, though I've decided anonymity no longer serves my purposes. This doesn't make any sense, Diana interjected. If you had that kind of money, why would you live in that little house in Oak Ridge? Drive that old car? Wear those? As she gestured vaguely at my clothes, unable to find a diplomatic way to finish her thought. Because those things make me happy, I said. The house is the perfect size for me. The car runs well. My clothes are comfortable. Thomas was shaking his head in disbelief. Where would you even get millions of dollars? Dad was an accountant. Your father was much more than that, I corrected. He managed investments for several very wealthy clients, and he was exceptional at it. He applied the same principles to our own finances. When he died, he left me very well provided for. How well? Thomas asked bluntly. I paused, considering how much to reveal. Well enough that I could make a substantial commitment to Westlake and still have more than I'll ever need for myself. Diana leaned forward, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. We're talking about millions? We're talking about what your father and I built together over 40 years of marriage, I said, my tone making it clear that specific numbers wouldn't be forthcoming, and about how I've chosen to use those resources. Thomas sat back, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so like his father, it made my heart constrict. I can't believe this. All these years, you've let us think you were just getting by on Dad's pension and Social Security. I never said that, I pointed out. You assumed. There's a difference. But you didn't correct us, Diana said accusingly. When we invited you for Christmas 2 years ago and offered to pay for your flight because we thought you couldn't afford it, I thanked you for your generosity and declined because I preferred to drive, I reminded her. I never pretended to be destitute, Diana. I simply chose not to discuss my finances. But why? Thomas demanded. Why keep this a secret from your own family? I took a sip of water, gathering my thoughts. When your father died, I made certain decisions about how I wanted to live the rest of my life. Maintaining our modest lifestyle while using our resources to support causes we believed in seemed right to me. And you didn't think your own son might want to know his father left behind a fortune? Thomas's voice had risen enough that several nearby diners glanced over curiously. Lower your voice, I said firmly. Your father didn't leave a fortune to me. He left everything to both of us, as his family. And I've offered financial help. To you many times over the years, Thomas. You've always refused. Small things, he scoffed. Offering to help with Zoe's summer camp or a family vacation? Not whatever this is. Because those were the things you mentioned struggling with, I said. You never indicated you needed more. In fact, you've spent years giving me the impression that you're quite successful in your own right. Diana shifted uncomfortably. Of course we're doing well, but there's a difference between doing well and funding university buildings. I studied them both, suddenly seeing with painful clarity the gap between their carefully cultivated image and their reality. Thomas's job at the investment firm was respectable, but not nearly as lucrative as he implied. The house in Ridgewood, estates, the luxury cars, the expensive vacations, all stretched their finances to the breaking point, but they maintained the facade at all costs. I've never judged how either of you chooses to spend your money, I said carefully. I would appreciate the same courtesy. Thomas laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. That's not the point, Mom. The point is, you've been secretly wealthy all this time and didn't tell us. Your own family. What would you have done differently if you had known? I asked. The question hung in the air between us. Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it again. Would you have treated me differently? I continued. Would you have visited more often? Included me in more family events? Not taught Zoe to be embarrassed by her grandmother? Diana's face flushed. That's not fair. We never... Zoe told me what you said about me coming to Parents' Weekend, I interrupted. That it would be embarrassing to have me around your friends from the Parents' Association, that I wouldn't fit in. Thomas at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. That's not exactly... It doesn't matter, I said, suddenly weary of the conversation. What matters is that Zoe is caught in the middle of this, and I won't have her thinking that a person's worth is determined by their bank account or their social standing. Is that what you think of us? Diana asked, her voice rising with indignation. That we're shallow people who only care about money and status? I looked at her for a long moment. I think you care very much about how others perceive you, and I think that concern has influenced my granddaughter in ways that aren't entirely positive. So this is our fault? Thomas demanded. Zoe didn't want you at Parents' Weekend, so you decided to, teach us all a lesson by revealing you're secretly rich? No, I said firmly. I decided it was time to stop hiding an important part of my life because it was creating distance between me and the people I love, including Zoe. The waiter approached again, looking hesitant after being waved off earlier. This time I signaled for him to come over. "I think we're ready to order now." Thomas looked like he wanted to object, but the presence of the waiter forced a temporary civility. We ordered our meals in strained silence. Once the waiter departed, I decided to change tack. "I'm meeting Zoe for lunch tomorrow," I said. "She's going to show me her dorm room. Would you like to join us?" The invitation clearly caught them off guard. Diana glanced at Thomas, who was studying me with a mixture of confusion and lingering anger. "I'm not trying to create division in our family," I said gently. "Quite the opposite. I'm trying to bridge a gap that's been widening for years." "By announcing you've been secretly funding Zoe's university?" Thomas challenged. "By finally being honest about who I am and what matters to me," I corrected. "The same way I hope you'll be honest with me." "What is that supposed to mean?" Diana asked defensively. I leaned forward, my voice softening. "It means I know you've been struggling financially, and I know pride has kept you from saying anything. But I'm your family. You don't have to pretend with me." The color drained from Thomas's face. "We're not struggling," he insisted, but the words lacked conviction. I reached across the table and took his hand. "Thomas, you don't have to keep up appearances with me. I'm your mother. I love you no matter what." Something in his expression cracked, a glimpse of vulnerability breaking through the careful facade. For a moment, I saw my little boy again, the one who used to run to me with skinned knees and broken toys, trusting me to make everything better. "We're not in trouble," he said, his voice quieter now. "But yes, things have been tighter than we'd like. The mortgage on the house is significant. Diana's interior design business hasn't taken off the way we hoped, and Zoe's tuition, even with the scholarship." He trailed off, unable to finish. "Why didn't you say something?" I asked. He pulled his hand away, straightening in his chair. "Because I'm a grown man. I should be able to provide for my family without running to my mother for help. Even if that means stretching yourself so thin you can barely breathe? Even if it means teaching Zoe that appearances matter more than honesty?" Diana made a small sound of protest. "That's not what we're teaching her, isn't it?" I challenged. Gently. "You've taught her to be embarrassed by a grandmother who doesn't wear designer clothes or drive a luxury car. You've taught her that fitting in with the right people is more important than being authentic." "That's not fair," Thomas objected. "We want Zoe to have opportunities, to move in circles that will benefit her future. What's wrong with that?" "Nothing, if it doesn't come at the cost of her character," I said, "or her ability to recognize genuine worth in others." Our food arrived, temporarily halting the conversation. We ate in silence for several minutes, the tension at the table palpable. I watched Thomas and Diana exchange glances, having one of those silent conversations long-married couples perfect over the years. Finally, Thomas set down his fork. "What happens now?" he asked. It was the same question Zoe had posed the night before. "That depends," I said. "On what you want to happen." "What does that mean?" Diana asked cautiously. "It means I'm still the same person I was yesterday. The only thing that's changed is your knowledge of my financial situation. So the question is, does that change how you see me? How you want to relate to me?" Thomas looked troubled. "It's not that simple, Mom. You've kept something huge from us for years. That kind of secret. It creates questions, makes us wonder what else we don't know." "I understand that," I acknowledged, "and I'm willing to answer your questions, but I hope you'll consider why I kept this private for so long. It wasn't to deceive you. It was because I wanted relationships, based on genuine connection, not financial consideration. And you thought we'd only value you for your money? Diana asked, sounding offended. I thought many people might, I corrected. It's a common human reaction. Money changes how people see you, how they relate to you. Sometimes in subtle ways they don't even recognize themselves. We're not many people, Thomas said. We're your family. Yes, I agreed. And families can be complicated, especially when it comes to money. Diana pushed her plate away, her meal barely touched. So what now? You start funding buildings with your name on them? Move into some mansion? Buy a sports car? I couldn't help but laugh at the picture she painted. No, Diana, I have no interest in any of those things. I'll continue living exactly as I have been. The only difference is that I'm no longer keeping my philanthropy anonymous. And what about us? Thomas asked, the question hanging heavy with implication. What about you? I countered. Are you... would you consider... He struggled to form the words. Thomas, I said gently, if you're asking whether I'd help you financially, the answer is yes. I always would have. But first, I think we need to have some honest conversations about values, about what really matters in life, about the example we're setting for Zoe. He nodded slowly, a complex mix of emotions playing across his face. Relief, embarrassment, perhaps a touch of shame. I don't want to control you with money, I continued. That's the last thing I want, but I do want us to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of honesty. And I want Zoe to understand that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account or social standing. You keep saying that, Diana noted, as if we've taught her otherwise. Haven't you? I asked quietly. The question lingered between us as the waiter cleared our plates. No one seemed eager to answer it directly. As we prepared to leave, the restaurant, Thomas hesitated, then asked, Who was that man who walked you back to the hotel this morning? James Blackwell, I said. A retired literature professor, a friend. Just a friend? Thomas asked, echoing Zoe's question from the night before. I smiled slightly. For now. His eyebrows rose, but he didn't press further. Outside the restaurant, the afternoon sun bathed the campus in golden light. Students crisscrossed the quad, backpacks slung over shoulders, wrapped in the cocoon of youth and possibility. We should get back to Ridgewood, Diana said, checking her watch. I have clients coming at 4. Of course, I said. Will you join Zoe and me for lunch tomorrow? Thomas and Diana exchanged another glance. We'll try, Thomas said, non-committal. It depends on how the morning goes. I nodded, understanding the need for time to process everything. Drive safely. As they walked toward their car, Thomas turned back. Mom, that scholarship Zoe has, the Wilson Merit Award, is that named after Dad? Yes, I said simply. He swallowed hard, something shifting in his expression. He would have been proud. Of the building too, I think, and of you. Thank you, I said, unexpected tears pricking at my eyes. That means a great deal to me. I watched them drive. Away, feeling oddly lighter despite the difficult conversation. Whatever happened next, the truth was finally out in the open. For better or worse, my family would have to see me for who I really was. Not just a conventional grandmother who baked cookies and tended her garden, but a woman with resources, influence, and a life of her own. My phone buzzed with a text from James. How did it go? I typed back, about as expected. Shock, confusion, some anger, but also the beginning of honesty. His response came quickly. Honesty is always a good place to start. Dinner tonight? I smiled at the screen. Yes, but first I have something to do. I pocketed my phone and began walking toward the campus center. It was time to visit the Heritage Center, not as an anonymous donor slipping quietly through the halls, but as Margaret Wilson, fully present and accounted for. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as I approached the building that had been my most significant contribution to Westlake. Students moved in and out of the grand entrance, backpacks slung over shoulders, lost in conversation or hurrying to their next class. None of them glanced twice at me, just another older woman on a campus that regularly welcomed parents and alumni. Inside, the soaring atrium welcomed visitors with warm lighting and comfortable seating areas. A large plaque near the entrance listed major donors with anonymous at the top in place of my name. Soon, that would change. I made my way to the third floor, where the Wilson Reading Room, named for Gerald, though few knew that, offered. Students a quiet sanctuary of books and cushioned window seats. It was my favorite space in the building, designed to my specifications with natural light flooding through floor-to-ceiling windows and views of the oldest oak trees on campus. The room was nearly empty this afternoon, with just 2 students huddled over textbooks at a far table. I selected a book from one of the shelves, a collection of poetry Gerald had loved, and settled into a window seat, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. As I opened the book, a sense of peace washed over me. Whatever storms might lie ahead with Thomas and Diana, whatever adjustments Zoe might still need to make to this new understanding of her grandmother, I knew this place would endure. Students would read here, dream here, discover ideas that would shape their futures long after I was gone. Some legacies, I reflected, were visible and tangible, like buildings with donor plaques. Others were quieter but no less significant. The values we passed on, the examples we set, the love we gave freely without expectation of return. Tomorrow, I would meet Zoe for lunch. We would begin building a new relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. And tonight, I would have dinner with James, a man who saw me clearly and valued me for exactly who I was. For now, though, I simply sat in the sunlight, surrounded by books in a room named for the man I had loved, content, in the knowledge that I was finally stepping fully into my own life, no longer hiding in the shadows of others' expectations or my own fears. A student entered the reading room, glancing around for a quiet spot to study. Her eyes passed over me, then returned, widening slightly in recognition. "Mrs. Wilson," she asked hesitantly. "You're Zoe's grandmother, right? I'm her roommate." "Lily." I smiled, closing my book. "Yes, that's right. It's nice to meet you, Lily." "Zoe mentioned you might be on campus this weekend," she said. "She's actually looking for you. Said something about changing your lunch plans to dinner tonight. Instead, she's been trying to call you." I reached for my phone, realizing I had silenced it earlier and missed Zoe's messages. "Thank you for letting me know. Do you know where she is now?" "Probably back at our dorm," Lily said. "She has a big literature paper due Monday, so she's been working on it all afternoon. Literature, perhaps in the class taught by the professor whose chair I had endowed. These connections, invisible but meaningful, had been part of what gave me joy all these years. "Thank you, Lily," I said, rising from the window seat. "I'll give her a call." As I walked back through the Heritage Center, I noticed more details than I usually allowed myself to appreciate: the quality of light through the carefully positioned skylights, the elegant curve of the central staircase, the acoustic balance that allowed for conversation without echoing. All elements I had discussed with architects and designers, all choices that reflected something of me and my values. Outside, I paused to look up at the building, allowing myself a moment of pride. Then I pulled out my phone to call my granddaughter, ready to continue rebuilding the connection that mattered more than any physical structure ever could. I called Zoe as I walked back toward the University Inn, curious about her request to change our lunch plans to dinner. She answered on the second ring, her voice breathless. "Grandma, I've been trying to reach you." "I'm sorry, dear. I had my phone on silent during lunch with your parents." There was a brief pause. "Oh. How did that go?" About as well as could be expected, I said diplomatically. Your roommate Lily mentioned something about changing our plans? Yes, Zoe's voice brightened. I was wondering if we could do dinner tonight instead of lunch tomorrow. There's this event at the Heritage Center, a student reading in the Wilson Room. I'm participating and I'd really like you to be there. The request caught me off guard. Just days ago, Zoe had been embarrassed by the thought of being seen with me. Now she was inviting me to watch her read in public. I'd love to, I said, warmth spreading through my chest. What time? 7 o'clock. It's not formal or anything. Just some students sharing original work. That sounds wonderful. Shall we have dinner afterward? Actually, Zoe hesitated. I was thinking maybe we could grab dinner before, around 5:30, and would it be okay if Professor Myers joined us? The mention of Professor Charlotte Myers, the distinguished literature scholar whose chair I had endowed, made me pause mid-step. Professor Myers wants to have dinner with us? Well, with you, really, Zoe admitted. When she found out you're my grandmother, she asked if I could introduce you. I hope that's okay? I thought about my dinner plans with James. Would you mind if I invited a friend to join us as well? The silver-haired man from last night? Zoe asked, a teasing note in her voice. Yes, I acknowledged, smiling despite myself. James Blackwell. He's a retired literature professor. I think he and Professor Myers might have a lot in common. Sure, that's fine, Zoe said easily. I'll make a reservation at Hartwell's for 4 at 5:30. Is that good? Perfect. I'll see you then. As I ended the call, I felt a curious mix of emotions. Joy at Zoe's invitation, certainly, but also a strange sense of displacement, as if the ground beneath my feet had shifted. For decades, I had moved carefully through two separate worlds, my modest personal life and my more influential role at Westlake. Now those worlds were colliding in ways I couldn't fully predict. I texted James about the change of plans. His response came quickly. Dinner with Charlotte Myers? She's brilliant. Looking forward to it. Back in my hotel suite, I took a moment to collect myself. The day had been emotionally exhausting, and it was only mid-afternoon. I kicked off my shoes and stretched out on the sofa, allowing myself a rare moment of rest. My thoughts drifted to Thomas and Diana, to the shock and confusion on their faces as they tried to reconcile their image of me with this new reality. I understood their feelings of betrayal. Keeping such a significant secret from one's family wasn't a small thing. But I also felt a flicker of resentment at their assumption that I owed them complete transparency about my finances while they maintained their own facade of effortless prosperity. The truth was more complicated than either of us wanted to admit. I had kept my wealth private partly out of a genuine preference for simplicity, partly from a desire to be valued for myself rather than my money, but also partly from a stubborn pride. I hadn't wanted Thomas to see me as a financial resource. I had wanted him to see me as his mother. To call because he wanted to share his life with me, not because he needed something. And perhaps, I acknowledged with a pang of guilt, I had been judging him and Diana more harshly than was fair. Their focus on status and appearances frustrated me, but wasn't I guilty of my own kind of pride? Hadn't I taken a certain satisfaction in being the secret benefactor? In knowing something my family didn't? The afternoon light shifted across the carpet as I lay there, examining my motivations with an honesty I rarely allowed myself. By the time I rose to prepare for dinner, I had reached a decision. Whatever happened with Thomas and Diana, whether they accepted this new understanding of me or not, I would approach them with compassion rather than judgment. Their values might differ from mine, but they were doing their best with the tools they had. I dressed for dinner with care, selecting a deep green wrap dress I'd purchased years ago for a university function. It was elegant without being showy, comfortable while still conveying a certain quiet confidence. I added a simple pearl necklace, Gerald's gift on our 30th anniversary, and surveyed myself in the mirror, The woman who looked back at me seemed different somehow, as if the external changes reflected a deeper transformation taking place within. At precisely 5:15, there was a knock at my door. James stood in the hallway, looking distinguished in a charcoal blazer over a light blue shirt. "You look lovely," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way that always made me feel both seen and appreciated. "Thank you," I replied, gathering my handbag. "I'm a bit nervous, if I'm being honest." "About dinner with your granddaughter? Or meeting the renowned Professor Myers?" he asked as we walked toward the elevator. "Both, I suppose, and about this whole new chapter. Everything is changing so quickly." James nodded thoughtfully. "Change can be disorienting, even when it's change we've chosen ourselves." "I'm not sure I did choose it," I admitted. "It feels more like circumstances forced my hand." "Perhaps," he said, "or perhaps the time was simply right. Sometimes life has a way of pushing us toward growth when we're ready for it, whether we recognize that readiness or not." We stepped out into the crisp autumn evening, the campus around us transformed by the golden hour light. Students walked in pairs or small groups, their laughter and conversations creating a backdrop of youthful energy. I thought about how many of them benefited from programs I had helped fund, scholarships I had established, faculty I had helped bring to Westlake. For years, I had taken satisfaction in that anonymous impact. Now I wondered what it would mean to be recognized for those contributions. Hartwell's was a small, elegant restaurant just off campus, popular with faculty and visiting parents alike. As we approached, I spotted Zoe waiting outside, engaged in conversation with a tall, striking woman I recognized as Professor Charlotte Myers. At 50-something, Charlotte had established herself as one of the country's preeminent scholars of American literature, with a particular focus on overlooked female writers. Her appointment to the Wilson Chair had been one of my proudest accomplishments. Zoe saw us approaching and waved, her face lighting up in a way that eased some of my lingering anxiety. She looked different somehow, more herself than I had seen her in years. "Grandma!" she called, stepping forward to meet us. "And you must be Mr. Blackwell." "James, please," he said, shaking her hand warmly. "This is Professor Myers," Zoe continued, gesturing to the woman beside her. "She's my American literature professor." Charlotte Myers extended her hand, first to me, then to James. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you properly, Margaret. I've heard so much about you from Robert Hayes over the years." "All good things." "I hope," I said, feeling strangely shy in her presence. "The very best," Charlotte assured me, though he was remarkably skilled at keeping your identity private. I had no idea the mysterious benefactor behind my endowed chair was Zoe's grandmother until she mentioned it in class this morning. We were shown to our table, a quiet corner spot with a view of the restaurant's small courtyard garden. As we settled in, I noticed Zoe watching me with an expression of curious assessment, as if seeing me through new eyes. "What did you say in class?" I asked her once we had ordered our drinks. Zoe flushed slightly. "We were discussing Wharton's House of Mirth, specifically the character of Lily Bart, and how economic realities shape women's choices. I mentioned that my grandmother had made choices that defied conventional expectations about wealth and status. She gave quite an insightful analysis," Charlotte added. "One of the most thoughtful contributions I've heard this semester." "It just made me think about how we judge people based on appearances," Zoe continued. "About how Lily Bart was trapped by society's expectations, but also by her own inability to imagine a different kind of life for herself." "And that reminded you of your grandmother?" James asked gently. "Kind of the opposite, actually," Zoe said, looking at me with newfound respect. "Grandma chose her own path, even when it didn't align with what others expected. She valued substance over appearance." I felt a rush of emotion at her words. After years of feeling increasingly distant from my granddaughter, here she was seeing me, truly seeing me perhaps for the first time. That's a generous interpretation, I said softly, though I don't know that I was quite so intentional about it all. But you were, Charlotte interjected. Your decision to fund the Wilson Chair specifically for research on overlooked female writers was quite deliberate, and your insistence on anonymity, that was a choice that speaks to your values. Our drinks arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. As the waiter moved away, James raised his glass in a subtle toast. To choices that reflect our truest selves, he said, his eyes meeting mine. I returned his gaze, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the restaurant's ambient temperature. And to the courage to make them, I added. As we turned our attention to the menus, I noticed Zoe watching our exchange with obvious interest. She caught my eye and gave me a small, approving smile that made me feel like our roles had somehow reversed, as if she were the wise elder, pleased by a younger person's promising development. The conversation flowed easily through dinner, ranging from literature to campus politics to the upcoming student reading. Charlotte and James discovered several mutual acquaintances in academic circles and fell into the comfortable shorthand of professionals in the same field. Zoe, rather than feeling excluded by their shop talk, seemed to relish being part of this adult intellectual exchange. Professor Myers has encouraged me to apply for the summer research fellowship, she mentioned during a lull in the conversation, to study the personal correspondence of female authors in the university archives. That sounds fascinating, I said. What authors are you interested in? Primarily the regionalists of the late 19th century, Jewett, Freeman, Wilkins, women who wrote about small communities and domestic spaces, but were actually making radical statements about female autonomy and alternative family structures. I blinked, struck by how mature and thoughtful she sounded, so different from the image-conscious young woman who had been embarrassed by her grandmother just days ago. The Wilson Fellowship would be perfect for Zoe's project, Charlotte noted. It provides funding for 8 weeks of dedicated research, plus a stipend for living expenses. The Wilson Fellowship? I repeated, surprised. I don't remember funding that. Charlotte smiled. It's relatively new. Robert established it 2 years ago, using a portion of your annual contribution. He mentioned it to you in last year's donor report. I laughed softly. I'm afraid I don't always read those as carefully as I should. Well, Zoe would be an excellent candidate, Charlotte continued. Her insights on Jewett's Country of the Pointed Firs were quite remarkable. Zoe ducked her head, clearly pleased by the praise but uncomfortable with being its direct object, a trait she had inherited from Gerald. The reading tonight includes a piece I wrote inspired by Jewett, she said, redirecting the conversation. It's nothing special, just a short story. I'm looking forward to hearing it, I told her sincerely. As dinner progressed, I found myself increasingly aware of James's presence beside me, the subtle warmth radiating from him, the way his hand occasionally brushed mine as he reached for his water glass, the attentive tilt of his head as he listened to others speak. We had shared countless meals over the past few years, but something felt different tonight. Perhaps it was simply the context, being here with Zoe, stepping more fully into the open about who I was and what mattered to me. By the time we finished our meal and prepared to head to the Heritage Center for the reading, a comfortable rapport had developed among the four of us. Walking across campus in the gathering dusk, Zoe fell into step beside me, letting Charlotte and James lead the way. Thanks for coming tonight, she said quietly. It means a lot. I wouldn't miss it, I assured her. She hesitated, then added, I'm sorry about what I said before, about you being embarrassing. It's all right, I said. We all say things we regret sometimes. No, it's not all right, she insisted. It was mean and shallow, and it wasn't even true. I was just... She trailed off, struggling to articulate her thoughts. Trying to fit in? I suggested gently. To be who you thought others wanted you to be? Something like that, she admitted. Mom and Dad are always so focused on appearances, on knowing the right people. It seemed like that was what mattered. And now? She was quiet for a moment, considering. Now, I'm not so sure. Seeing you with Professor Myers, hearing how you've supported all these programs and never wanted recognition, it makes me think about what really matters, about the kind of person I want to be. I reached out and squeezed her hand, unable to find words adequate to express what her statement meant to me. The Heritage Center glowed against the darkening sky as we approached, its windows illuminated from within. Students streamed toward the entrance, many carrying notebooks or laptops. Inside, the Wilson Reading Room had been transformed for the evening event, with chairs arranged in rows facing a small podium. About half the seats were already filled, primarily with students, but also a scattering of faculty members. We found places in the third row, Zoe excusing herself to join the other student presenters at the front of the room. As we settled in, I noticed several people glancing in our direction, whispering to each other with curious expressions. Word had clearly spread about my connection to the university. "Are you uncomfortable with the attention?" James asked softly, noticing my slightly tense posture. "A bit," I admitted. "I've spent so long being anonymous." "You'll adjust," he assured me. "And so will they. Soon enough, you'll just be Margaret Wilson, Zoe's grandmother and Westlake supporter." "That sounds rather nice, actually," I said, relaxing slightly. The reading began with brief introductions from the faculty sponsor, a young professor of creative writing. 8 students would present original work, each piece inspired by an author they had studied in their various literature courses. Zoe was scheduled to read fourth. The first 3 students presented poems and short prose pieces influenced by Hemingway, Baldwin, and Plath. Each reading was met with enthusiastic applause, the audience supportive of these young writers' efforts. When Zoe's turn came, I sat up straighter, a mixture of pride and nervousness flowing through me. She approached the podium with a quiet confidence, adjusting the microphone slightly before looking out at the audience. Her eyes found mine briefly, and she gave a small smile. "My piece is inspired by Sarah Orne Jewett's The Country of the Aitai, Pointed Firs," she began. "It's called The Inheritance." What followed was a beautifully crafted short story about a young woman who discovers her grandmother's journals after her death, revealing a life of quiet purpose and hidden influence that transforms the granddaughter's understanding of her family legacy. The parallels to our own situation were clear but handled with subtlety and nuance, the narrative transformed into art rather than mere autobiography. As Zoe read, her voice grew stronger, more assured. The audience listened intently, pulled into the world she had created. I found myself holding my breath at certain passages, moved almost to tears by the sensitivity with which she had captured the complicated relationship between generations, the misunderstandings and reconnections. When she finished, there was a moment of profound silence before the applause began, more sustained and enthusiastic than for any previous reader. Charlotte leaned over to whisper, "She has remarkable talent," while James pressed his hand over mine in a gesture of understanding support. The remaining students presented their work, but I found it difficult to focus, still processing the gift Zoe had given me through her story, the gift of being seen and understood, of having our complicated relationship transformed through her creative insight. After the final reader, a small reception was held in the atrium outside the Wilson Room. Students clustered in animated conversation, faculty members circulated offering feedback and encouragement, and small plates of refreshments were available on a side table. Zoe found us quickly, her eyes bright with the residual energy of her performance. "What did you think?" she asked, looking primarily at me. "It was beautiful," I said simply. "Truly beautiful, Zoe." "Indeed," Charlotte agreed. "One of the finest undergraduate pieces I've encountered in years. With your permission, I'd like to nominate it for the Westlake Literary Review's Student Showcase. Zoe's eyes widened. Really? That would be amazing. You've captured something essential about intergenerational relationships, James observed. The way understanding often comes too late, but when it does, it transforms everything that follows. Zoe nodded, pleased by his thoughtful analysis. That's exactly what I was trying to express. As we stood talking, I noticed Dr. Hayes entering the reception area, his eyes scanning the crowd. When he spotted us, he made his way over, greeting each of us warmly before turning to me. Margaret, I wonder if I might have a word with you. Privately? He asked. Curious, I excused myself and followed him to a quieter corner of the atrium. I wanted to update you on a few things, he said once we were alone. First, regarding the science wing, the board has unanimously approved naming it the Gerald Wilson Science Center if that meets with your approval. It does, I said, touched by the gesture. Gerald had always had a deep appreciation for the sciences, despite his career in finance. Thank you. Secondly, he continued, looking slightly uncomfortable, I received several calls from your son today. He was quite persistent in his questions about your involvement with the university. I imagine he was, I said dryly. Thomas is processing a lot of new information. Yes, well. Dr. Hayes adjusted his tie. I maintained appropriate confidentiality, of course, but he seemed quite determined to understand the full extent of your contributions. I appreciate your discretion, I told him. Thomas and I are working through this transition. It will take time. Dr. Hayes nodded. On a more positive note, I've been approached by several faculty members who learned of your identity. There's significant interest in having you speak to our Women in Philanthropy student group. Your perspective on anonymous giving and supporting educational causes would be invaluable to our students. The suggestion caught me off guard. Public speaking had never been my forte, and I had deliberately avoided the spotlight for so long that the idea of standing before a group of students was mildly terrifying. I'll consider it, I said cautiously, though I'm not sure I have anything particularly insightful to offer. On the contrary, Dr. Hayes said firmly, your approach to philanthropy is rather unique in today's environment. Most major donors want recognition, buildings named after them, plaques, mentions in university publications. Your insistence on anonymity and your focus on substantive impact rather than personal legacy is exactly the kind of perspective our students should hear. Before I could respond, I noticed Thomas and Diana entering the atrium, looking somewhat out of place among the students and faculty. Thomas's eyes scanned the room, eventually finding me in conversation with Dr. Hayes. His expression was unreadable as he and Diana made their way toward us. I believe your family has arrived, Dr. Hayes noted. Shall I make my excuses? No. Need, I assured him. They'll have to get used to my involvement with Westlake sooner or later. As Thomas and Diana approached, I introduced them to Dr. Hayes, watching as Thomas's demeanor shifted into what I thought of as his professional mode. Back straightened, handshake firm, voice modulated to convey confident authority. President Hayes, he said, I've been trying to reach you all day. Yes, I received your messages, Dr. Hayes replied smoothly. I apologize for not getting back to you sooner. It's been a rather full schedule. I understand you've been working with my mother for some time, Thomas continued, a slight edge to his voice. Indeed, Dr. Hayes confirmed. Margaret has been one of Westlake's most valued supporters for nearly 2 decades. Her vision and generosity have transformed our campus in countless ways. Diana's eyes darted between us, clearly trying to gauge the full implications of this statement. We had no idea, she said, a note of defensiveness in her tone. Margaret never mentioned any of this to us. Yes, she has always preferred to keep her philanthropy private, Dr. Hayes acknowledged. A preference we've respected, though I've often told her how much our community would benefit from knowing the person behind so many of our most important initiatives. The conversation might have grown more awkward had Zoe not appeared at that moment, still glowing from the success of her reading. "Mom! Dad! You came!" she exclaimed, genuine pleasure in her voice. "We wouldn't miss your reading, sweetheart," Diana said, embracing her. "Though you might have given us more notice." "It was a last-minute decision to participate," Zoe explained. "Did you hear any of it?" "We caught the end," Thomas told her. "Something about a grandmother's journals?" "That's right," Zoe said, glancing at me with a small smile. "It was inspired by Sarah Orne Jewett, but also by recent events." The significance of this statement wasn't lost on Thomas and Diana, whose expressions shifted almost imperceptibly. "Professor Myers thinks it might be published in the Westlake Literary Review," Zoe continued, enthusiasm overriding her usual reserve. "Isn't that amazing?" "That's wonderful, honey," Diana said automatically, though her attention seemed divided between Zoe's news and the ongoing assessment of this new situation. "Perhaps we could all continue this conversation somewhere more comfortable?" I suggested, aware that we were attracting curious glances from nearby students. "The reception appears to be winding down." "An excellent idea, Doctor," Hayes agreed. "If you'll excuse me, I should congratulate the other student presenters before I leave. Margaret, we'll speak again about that lecture opportunity." As he moved away, Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Lecture opportunity?" "Dr. Hayes thinks the students might benefit from hearing about my approach to philanthropy," I explained, "though I'm not convinced I'm the right person for such a task." "I think you'd be perfect," Zoe said firmly. "Your story is really inspiring, Grandma." The sincerity in her voice touched me deeply. Just days ago, she had found me embarrassing. Now she was publicly claiming me as a source of inspiration. "Inspiring isn't exactly the word I would use," Thomas muttered, just loudly enough for me to hear. "Secretive, maybe." James, who had joined our small group along with Charlotte, gave Thomas a measured look. "Perhaps another perspective might help," he suggested diplomatically. "Margaret's choice to give anonymously is increasingly rare in a world where philanthropy often comes with naming rights and public recognition." Charlotte nodded in agreement. "The Wilson Chair has allowed me to mentor dozens of promising scholars who might otherwise have been overlooked. That impact resonates far beyond any plaque on a wall." Thomas seemed about to respond when Zoe interjected. "Mom, Dad, we were thinking of getting coffee at the Bluebird Cafe. Would you like to join us?" Diana glanced at her watch. "It's getting rather late, Zoe, and we have that breakfast with the Harringtons tomorrow." "The Harringtons can wait," Thomas said unexpectedly. "I think we should join them." Diana's eyebrows rose in surprise, but she didn't contradict him. The six of us made our way across campus toward the Bluebird Cafe, an unlikely procession of family members and academics. Navigating a new and uncertain terrain, the evening had turned cool, with a crispness in the air that hinted at the coming winter. Students passed us in groups, their youthful energy a stark contrast to the measured conversation of our party. The cafe was busy but not crowded, filled, with students hunched over laptops or engaged in animated discussion. We found a table in the corner, large enough to accommodate our group but intimate enough for conversation. As we settled in with our drinks, coffee for some, tea for others, an awkward silence descended. "Your story was really beautiful, Zoe," Charlotte said, breaking the tension. "The way you captured the grandmother's hidden life, the impact she had that her family never saw, was quite profound." "Thank you," Zoe replied, warming to the conversation. "I was thinking about how we often don't see the whole truth about the people in our lives, especially across generations." "An apt observation," James commented. "We tend to flatten others into the roles they play for us, missing the fullness of their experience." Thomas stirred his coffee with more force than necessary. Some people make that flattening easier by deliberately hiding significant aspects of their lives. I met my son's gaze directly. That's fair criticism, Thomas. Though I might suggest that seeing others completely requires genuine interest in who they are beyond their relationship to us. Diana shifted uncomfortably. Well, it's not as if... We never asked about your life, Margaret. You just never mentioned being some secret millionaire philanthropist. Would it have made a difference? I asked quietly. In how often you visited, in whether you wanted me at family gatherings, in how you spoke about me to Zoe. The questions hung in the air, pointed but not accusatory. Diana looked away, unable to meet my eyes. That's not entirely fair, Mom, Thomas said, his voice softer than before. We've had our own struggles, our own pressures. I know, I acknowledged, and I'm not trying to assign blame. I'm simply asking us all to consider whether we've really seen each other clearly. Zoe, who had been watching this exchange intently, leaned forward. I think that's what I was trying to say in my story. The granddaughter thought she knew who her grandmother was, but she was only seeing the surface, the part that fit with her expectations. When she discovered the journals, she realized there was this whole other dimension to her grandmother's life that she'd completely missed. Charlotte nodded appreciatively. And that discovery transformed not just how she saw her grandmother, but how she understood herself and her own possibilities. Exactly, Zoe said, her face lighting up at being understood. She realized she'd been limiting herself by accepting other people's definitions of success and value. I felt a rush of pride, not just at Zoe's insight, but at her willingness to engage with these difficult questions. The withdrawn, image-conscious young woman who had texted me days ago seemed to be receding, replaced by someone more thoughtful and authentic. Thomas was watching his daughter with an expression I couldn't quite read. Part pride, part confusion, perhaps even a touch of defensiveness. These are all very profound observations, he said finally. But they don't address the practical realities of the situation. Mom has been living modestly while sitting on significant resources that could have helped with Zoe's education, with our mortgage, with any number of financial pressures we've faced over the years. I offered to help many times, Thomas. I reminded him gently. You always refused. Small things, he said dismissively. A contribution to Zoe's summer camp, an offer to pay for a family vacation, not substantial financial assistance. Because you never indicated you needed substantial assistance, I countered. You presented yourselves as thoroughly successful, managing well on your own. Was I supposed to assume that was a facade? Diana's cheeks flushed. It wasn't a facade. We are successful, we've just had some temporary setbacks, which you never shared with me, I pointed out. How could I offer help for problems I didn't know existed? James cleared his throat softly. If I may offer an observation. It seems there have been assumptions on both sides. Margaret assumed you would ask if you needed significant help. You assumed her resources were limited to small contributions. Perhaps the question now is how to move forward with greater transparency. Charlotte, who had been listening attentively, added, In my experience, money discussions in families are rarely just about money. They're about values, autonomy, love, control, all manner of complex emotions. This isn't a therapy session, Diana said, a defensive edge in her voice. No, Charlotte agreed, but it is a family trying to find its way through a significant revelation. That deserves some care and thoughtfulness. Zoe, who had been quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. Can I ask something? If Grandma had told you about her money years ago, what would have been different? What would you have wanted to change? Thomas seemed taken aback by the directness of the question. Well, for one thing, we might not have stretched ourselves so thin financially. The house in Ridgewood was probably more than we should have taken on. But you loved that house, Zoe pointed out. You were so proud when we moved in. You talked about how it showed that you'd arrived. Diana shifted uncomfortably. That's not the only reason we bought it. Isn't it? Zoe pressed. Every time we have people over, you talk about the address, the neighborhood, how exclusive it is. Zoe, Thomas said warningly, that's enough. But this is exactly what we're talking about, isn't it? Zoe continued, a new confidence in her voice. About seeing people clearly, about being honest about what matters to us. Grandma chose to live simply and give anonymously because those values were important to her. You and Mom chose to live in Ridgewood and drive luxury cars because those values were important to you. Why is her choice wrong and yours right? The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples of tension expanding outward. I watched as Thomas struggled to formulate a response, clearly caught between defensiveness and a dawning recognition of the pattern Zoe was illuminating. It's not that simple, he finally said. Your mother and I made choices based on what we thought was best for our family, for your future. So did I said softly. I chose to fund programs and scholarships that would benefit students like Zoe for generations to come. I chose to live within my means so that I could direct my resources toward things that would outlast me. But you didn't consult us, Diana interjected. You made these enormous financial decisions unilaterally. Just as you made your financial decisions without consulting me, I countered. We're adults, Diana. We're entitled to manage our resources according to our own judgment. James, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Perhaps the issue isn't so much about who had the right to make which decisions, but about the distance that's grown between you because of the secrets and assumptions on both sides. His gentle observation seemed to deflate some of the tension. Thomas sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so like his father it made my heart ache. Look, Mom, he said, his voice softer now. I'm not saying you didn't have the right to do what you did with your money. I'm saying it hurt to discover you kept something so significant from us. It makes me wonder what else I don't know about you. The vulnerability in his admission caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw not the successful professional sitting across from me, but the little boy who had once trusted me completely, who had believed I held all the answers. I understand, I said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. And I'm sorry for that hurt. There isn't some treasure trove of additional secrets, Thomas. Just a woman who made choices based on what seemed right at the time, who perhaps didn't always consider how those choices might affect the people she loves. A brief silence followed, less tense than before, as if something had shifted subtly in our understanding of each other. Charlotte, with the intuitive timing of an experienced educator, gently redirected the conversation. Zoe, have you thought more about the summer research fellowship? Applications aren't due until March, but it's not too early to begin formulating your proposal. Grateful for the change of subject, Zoe launched into a description of her research interests. The conversation gradually lightened, moving from academic topics to campus traditions to local restaurants worth visiting. Diana remained somewhat reserved, but Thomas began to engage more genuinely, asking questions about Zoe's classes and seeming genuinely interested in her responses. As the evening wore on, I found myself watching my family with new eyes. Thomas, beneath his facade of confident success, carried the same fundamental insecurities I had known since he was a child, the need to prove himself, to be seen as accomplished and worthy. Diana, for all her focus on status and appearances, clearly cared deeply about providing opportunities for Zoe, about creating a life that felt secure and meaningful. And Zoe was transforming before my eyes, shedding the brittle shell of self-consciousness to reveal a young woman of substance and insight. The influence of Westlake was visible in her intellectual confidence, in the way she engaged with difficult questions and articulated complex ideas. Whatever mistakes I had made in my relationship with Thomas and Diana, my investment in Westlake had indeed created a place where Zoe could flourish. As the cafe began to empty, we reluctantly gathered ourselves to leave. Outside, the campus was quiet, most students having returned to their dormitories or apartments. The clear night sky revealed a canopy of stars, unusually visible despite the ambient light of the university. "We should head back to Ridgewood," Diana said, checking her watch. "It's nearly midnight." "You could stay at the University Inn," I suggested. "I'm sure they have rooms available." Thomas hesitated, then shook his head. "Thanks, Mom, but we should get home. We have commitments tomorrow." Zoe looked disappointed. "But you'll come back for Parents' Weekend in November, right?" "Both of you." "Of course," Diana assured her, though I noted she didn't look at me as she said it. "And Grandma, too," Zoe added pointedly. "I want all three of you there." Thomas and Diana exchanged a glance, some unspoken communication passing between them. "Of course," Thomas said finally. "We're all family." The words were simple, but carried a weight of tentative reconciliation. Not everything was resolved, far from it. But there was an acknowledgement that whatever came next, we would face it together. We said our goodbyes in the parking lot, Zoe hugging each of us tightly before heading back to her dormitory. Charlotte departed with a warm handshake and a promise to continue our conversation about the Women in Philanthropy lecture. Thomas and Diana left for Ridgewood, leaving James and me standing alone beneath the starlit sky. "Would you like to walk for a bit?" he asked. "The night is too beautiful to waste." I nodded, grateful for his steady presence after the emotional intensity of the evening. We strolled in comfortable silence along the campus paths, our footsteps synchronized in an easy rhythm. "That went better than you feared," James observed after a while. "Yes," I agreed, "though we've only begun to address the deeper issues." "Relationships take time to heal," he said, "especially when they've been shaped by years of misunderstanding and distance." I keep thinking about what Zoe said, about how we don't really see the whole truth about the people in our lives. I wonder how much I've missed about Thomas and Diana because I was focused on the aspects of their choices that frustrated me. James considered this. Perspective is always partial. We see others through the lens of our own values, our own hopes and disappointments. The challenge is remembering that our perspective isn't the only valid one. We paused by a small pond, its surface reflecting the stars above. The beauty of the moment, the tranquil water, the gentle breeze, the companionable silence between us, felt like a balm after the turbulence of recent days. "Thank you for being here through all of this," I said, turning to face him. "Your presence has made a difficult situation more bearable." In the soft glow of the campus lighting, James's eyes were warm with understanding. "That's what friends do, Margaret. They show up for the complicated moments." "Is that what we are? Friends?" The question slipped out before I could consider its implications. James smiled, a gentle curve of his lips that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I think we're something rather more than that, don't you?" My heart fluttered in a way I hadn't experienced in decades. "Yes," I admitted. "I believe we are." He reached for my hand, his fingers twining with mine in a gesture both casual and profound. We stood like that for several moments, neither rushing to define or analyze the quiet shift taking place between us. "I should get you back to the hotel," he said finally. "It's been a long day." We walked back toward the University Inn, still hand in hand, our silence comfortable and full of unspoken possibility. At the entrance, James paused. "Breakfast tomorrow?" he asked, "before you meet Zoe for lunch." "I'd like that," I said. 9 o'clock at the Bluebird? Perfect. He hesitated, then leaned forward to place a gentle kiss on my cheek. "Good night, Margaret." "Good night, James." I watched him walk away, a tall figure receding into the night before entering the hotel. In my suite, I moved to the window, looking out at the campus spread below, its buildings dark except for security lighting. So much had changed in just a few days. My relationship with Zoe, my standing at Westlake, the tentative beginnings of something new with James, the complicated renegotiation with Thomas and Diana. It was exhausting and exhilarating all at once, like stepping out of a small, familiar room into a vast landscape of possibility. Whatever came next would require courage and patience, a willingness to be vulnerable in ways I had long avoided. But for the first time in years, I felt fully alive, fully present in my own life, rather than hovering at its margins. I slept deeply that night, waking to bright sunshine streaming through the curtains. After showering and dressing, I checked my phone to find a text from Zoe. "Can we make lunch at 1 instead of 12? Study group running late." I replied with a quick affirmative, then added, "Last night meant a great deal to me. Thank you for sharing your beautiful story." Her response came immediately. "It meant a lot to me too. See you at 1. Love you, Grandma." Those 3 simple words, "Love you, Grandma," filled me with a joy that seemed disproportionate to their simplicity. How long had it been since Zoe had expressed affection so directly? Years, certainly. The distance that had grown between us had seemed unbridgeable just days ago. Now, while not erased, it felt navigable. I arrived at the Bluebird Cafe a few minutes before 9, finding James already at our usual table with 2 steaming mugs waiting. "You look well rested," he observed as I sat down. "I am," I admitted. "Despite everything, I slept better than I have in months." Sometimes clarity brings peace, even when the clarity itself is challenging. We spent a leisurely hour over breakfast, discussing everything from campus politics to our favorite poets, the conversation flowing with the ease of long acquaintance deepened by recent developments. As we were finishing our second cups of tea, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen showed Thomas's name. "It's my son," I told James, feeling a flicker of apprehension. "I should take this." He nodded, understanding, and I stepped outside the cafe for privacy. "Good morning, Thomas," I answered, keeping my tone neutral. "Mom." His voice sounded tired but less tense than the previous day. "I wanted to call before we head back to Ridgewood. Diana and I talked a lot last night and, well, I owe you an apology." The admission caught me off guard. "An apology?" "For how I reacted yesterday, for the assumptions I made. It wasn't fair to you." I leaned against the cafe wall, unexpectedly moved by his words. "Thank you, Thomas. That means a great deal to me." "I still have questions," he continued. "A lot of them, actually. About Dad's investments, about your relationship with Westlake, about why you chose to live the way you have. But I should have approached all of that with more, I don't know, respect for your autonomy, I guess." "I appreciate that," I said. "And I'm open to answering your questions. All of them. I want us to move forward with honesty, however uncomfortable that might be sometimes." He was quiet for a moment. "Zoe's story last night. It made me think about things differently, about how little I know about your life, your thoughts, about how rarely I've asked." "We can change that," I suggested gently, "if you want to." "I do," he said, with a sincerity that warmed my heart. "I really do, Mom." "Then we will," I promised. "One conversation at a time." After we said our goodbyes, I stood for a moment in the morning sunshine, feeling a cautious hope unfurling within me. The path ahead wasn't clear. There were still difficult conversations to have, trust to rebuild, patterns to reshape. But the first steps had been taken, and they were more promising than I had dared to hope. James appeared at the cafe door, his expression questioning. "Everything all right?" "Yes," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "Better than all right, actually. Thomas apologized for his reaction yesterday. We're going to try to rebuild our relationship on more honest terms." "That's wonderful news," James said, his genuine pleasure in my happiness, one of the many qualities I had come to cherish about him. "I have a few hours before meeting Zoe for lunch," I said. "Would you like to show me that walking trail you mentioned? The one with the old-growth trees?" "I'd love to," he replied, offering his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. We spent the late morning walking through a wooded area at the edge of campus, the autumn foliage creating a canopy of gold and crimson above us. James, who had studied botany before turning to literature, pointed out various tree species and shared anecdotes about the history of the campus landscape. I found myself relaxing into the simple pleasure of his company, the shared experience of beauty, the easy exchange of ideas and observations. As we circled back toward campus, our conversation turned to future plans. "Will you stay in town through the weekend?" James asked. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "I'd originally planned to leave tomorrow, but now things have changed," he finished for me. "Yes, significantly." "For what it's worth, I hope you'll stay," he said. "Not just for Zoe or Westlake, but—" He hesitated, then continued with characteristic directness. "For us, Margaret. I'd like the chance to explore what's developing between us without the pressure of imminent departure." His honesty both touched and unnerved me. At 70, I hadn't expected to find myself navigating the tentative beginnings of romance again. The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. "I'd like that." "Too," I admitted. "Though I have to confess, this is unfamiliar territory for me after all these years." James smiled, the expression lighting his entire face. "For me as well, but perhaps that's what makes it special, discovering together what might be possible at this stage of our lives." We had reached the edge of the central campus, where students were beginning to gather for midday classes. The youthful energy around us created a striking contrast to our measured pace and conversation, yet I felt an unexpected kinship with these young people just beginning their adult lives. Like them, I stood at the threshold of new possibilities, new understandings, new connections. "I should head back to the hotel to freshen up before meeting Zoe," I said as we paused near the library. "Of course," James agreed. "Dinner tonight? I know a wonderful little Italian place just off campus." "I'd like that," I said, smiling at the simple pleasure of having someone, to look forward to. As I walked back to the University Inn, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. The mask of anonymity I had worn for so long had been removed, revealing not just my financial resources and philanthropy, but something more fundamental, my authentic self, with all its complexities and contradictions. In letting myself be seen, by Zoe, by Thomas and Diana, by the Westlake community, and perhaps most significantly by James, I had opened myself to vulnerability, but also to genuine connection. The road ahead would doubtless have its challenges and disappointments, its moments of misunderstanding and retreat. But for the first time in years, I was moving forward as my whole self, not just the carefully edited version I had presented to the world. I thought of Zoe's story, of the granddaughter discovering her grandmother's journals and realizing there had been depths and dimensions to the older woman she had never recognized. Perhaps the most valuable inheritance we can offer those we love isn't money or property, but the truth of who we are, our struggles and triumphs, our values and choices, the authentic core of our being. With that thought warming me like an internal flame, I continued toward the hotel, eager for lunch with my granddaughter and whatever might follow in this new chapter of my life. Lunch with Zoe proved to be one of the most relaxed interactions we'd had in years. We met at a small bistro just off campus, its walls adorned with local artwork and photographs of Westlake through the decades. Zoe arrived slightly breathless, her cheeks flushed from hurrying across campus. "Sorry I'm late," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. The study group went longer than expected. "No need to apologize," I assured her. "I've been enjoying people watching." We ordered soup and salad for me, a vegetable panini for Zoe, and fell into easy conversation about her classes, her writing, her plans for the upcoming semester. There was a new openness in how she spoke, as if the barriers between us had been at least partially dismantled. Professor Myers says I should consider graduate school, she mentioned as we were finishing our meal. She thinks I have a strong critical perspective. What do you think? I asked, genuinely curious about her aspirations. Zoe considered the question, stirring the remains of her iced tea thoughtfully. I'm not sure yet. I love literature, but I'm also interested in publishing, maybe editing. I want to help bring important voices to readers. That sounds like meaningful work, I said. Whatever you decide, I hope you'll choose based on what truly excites you, not what others expect. She nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. That's what I'm learning from you, Grandma. To make choices based on my own values, not external expectations. The simple statement filled me with unexpected emotion. I'm still learning that lesson myself, I admitted. It's the work of a lifetime, I think. Our conversation shifted to Thomas and Diana, to the complex dynamics that had shaped our family relationships over the years. Dad called you this morning? Zoe asked. Yes, I confirmed. We had a good talk, short but promising. He and Mom were up late discussing everything, she said. I could hear them from the guest room. They rarely argue, but last night they did. Not angrily, just intensely. I considered this information. Sometimes difficult conversations are necessary for growth. I think Mom feels threatened, Zoe observed with surprising insight. Like your choices somehow invalidate hers. That wasn't my intention, I said carefully. Everyone must find their own path. I know that, Zoe assured me. And I think Dad does too. Mom will come around eventually. She just needs time to adjust her image of you, of all of us, really. I reached across the table to squeeze her hand, marveling at the maturity she was displaying. When did you get so wise? She laughed. I don't know about wise, but the last few days have made me think a lot about authenticity, about the stories we tell ourselves and others, about what really matters. After lunch, Zoe insisted on giving me a proper tour of her dormitory and introducing me to her friends. Unlike the embarrassment she had expressed just days ago, she now proudly presented me as my grandmother, who funds the Wilson Chair in American Literature. The transformation was startling and deeply moving. Back at the University Inn that afternoon, I found myself with a few hours to reflect before my dinner with James. Sitting by the window overlooking the campus, I opened my laptop and began composing an email to Dr. Hayes. After careful consideration, I had decided to accept his invitation to speak to the Women in Philanthropy group. If my story could help even a few students think differently about wealth, influence, and authenticity, it would be worth pushing beyond my comfort zone. As I worked on the email, my phone rang. It was Diana. Margaret? Her voice sounded tentative, unlike her usual confident tone. Do you have a moment to talk? Of course, I said, setting aside my laptop. Is everything all right? Yes, fine. She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. Thomas told me he called you this morning, that you had a good conversation. We did, I confirmed. I appreciated his perspective. I wanted to reach out as well, she continued, to apologize. For my reaction yesterday, it wasn't my best moment. The admission clearly cost her something. Diana had always presented herself as polished and in control, rarely acknowledging mistakes or vulnerabilities. Thank you, Diana, I said warmly. I understand this has been a shock for everyone. It's not just that, she said after a moment. It's seeing Zoe with you last night, the way she looks up to you now. I guess I've always worried about not measuring up as a mother, And then to see her so impressed by you, by your choices that are so different from mine. The honesty of her admission touched me. Diana, Zoe loves you. You're her mother, and nothing can change that bond. She's just discovering that there are different ways to approach life, different values to consider. That's part of growing up. I know, she sighed. Intellectually, I know that. It's just hard sometimes. I've always wanted to give her everything. Opportunities, connections, security. To do better than my own parents did. This glimpse into Diana's motivations helped me see her more clearly than I had in years. Behind the focus on status and appearances was a mother trying her best with the tools and understanding she had. We all want what's best for our children and grandchildren, I said gently. We just define best differently sometimes. Yes, she agreed. I'm beginning to see that more clearly. We talked for nearly half an hour. The conversation ranging from Zoe's academic interests to the challenges of modern parenting to Diana's own upbringing in a family that had struggled financially. By the time we said goodbye, something fundamental had shifted between us, not a complete transformation, but a crack in the wall of misunderstanding that had separated us for so long. That evening, James picked me up at the hotel for dinner. The Italian restaurant he had mentioned was a charming, family-owned establishment with soft lighting, checkered tablecloths, and the rich aromas of garlic and herbs filling the air. Over a shared bottle of Chianti and plates of handmade pasta, we continued the easy conversation that had characterized our friendship from the beginning, now tinged with the subtle awareness of something more developing between us. Have you decided how long you'll stay? James asked as we lingered over dessert and coffee. Through the weekend, at least, I said. Dr. Hayes wants to discuss the lecture for the Women in Philanthropy group, and I'd like to spend more time with Zoe while I'm here. And after that? He asked, his expression open and interested rather than pressuring. I considered the question. I'll go home to Oak Ridge for a while. There are things to arrange, changes to consider. Changes? James prompted gently. I met his gaze directly. Yes, I've been thinking about what it means to live authentically at this stage of my life, about what I want the next chapter to look like. And what have you concluded? That? I'd like it to include more time here at Westlake, I said, taking a small risk. More involvement with the university community, more time with Zoe as she completes her education. James's eyes crinkled with pleasure. I think that sounds like an excellent plan. And selfishly, I'm delighted at the prospect of seeing more of you. I was hoping you might feel that way, I admitted. He reached across the table to take my hand, his touch warm and reassuring. Margaret, at our age, we've earned the right to be direct about what we want. And I want to explore this connection between us, to see where it might lead. The simple honesty of his statement made me smile. I want that too, I said. Though I have to warn you, I come with some complications these days. A granddaughter rediscovering her relationship with me, a son and daughter-in-law adjusting to a new understanding of who I am, a growing public role at Westlake. Those aren't complications, James countered. They're the rich texture of a life fully lived, and I find that incredibly attractive. The words warmed me in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Gerald had been gone for 12 years, and while I had built a satisfying life for myself, I had assumed that certain doors, romance, partnership, the particular joy of being truly seen and cherished by another, had closed permanently. James's presence in my life was reopening possibilities I had long since set aside. The weekend passed in a pleasant blur of activities. Saturday brought a campus tour with Dr. Hayes, who was eager to show me recent developments and discuss future initiatives. We visited the site of the planned Gerald Wilson Science Center, where architectural renderings displayed a modern, light-filled building designed to inspire the next generation of researchers and innovators. Gerald would have loved this, I told Dr. Hayes as we studied the plans. He always said science was humanity's best hope for solving our most pressing problems. We'll make sure his vision is reflected in every aspect of the center, Dr. Hayes assured me. And with your permission, we'd like to include a display about Gerald himself, his approach to investment, his belief in education, his values. The suggestion touched me deeply. I think that would be wonderful. Thank you. Saturday evening. Brought dinner with Zoe and several of her friends at a pizza place popular with students. I watched with quiet joy as she introduced me proudly, no trace remaining of the embarrassment she had expressed just days earlier. These bright, engaged young people peppered me with questions about my philanthropy, my views on education, my experiences. Their genuine interest and respect were profoundly moving. "Your grandmother is amazing," one young woman told Zoe as the evening wound down. "You're so lucky to have her in your life." Zoe's response, "I know, I really am," brought tears to my eyes. Sunday morning, James and I attended a chamber music concert at the Westlake Performing Arts Center, another facility that had benefited from my anonymous donations over the years. The music washed over us in waves of beauty and emotion, his hand warm in mine, the shared experience creating yet another layer of connection between us. After the concert, we walked through the campus gardens, ablaze with autumn color. "I've been thinking," James said as we paused by a particularly magnificent sugar maple. "I have a sabbatical coming up next semester. I've been considering spending it writing in New England, perhaps Vermont or Maine." "That sounds lovely," I said, imagining the peaceful productivity of such an arrangement. "Oak Ridge isn't far from the areas I'm considering," he continued casually. "It might be nice to have a home base nearby, someone to have dinner with occasionally, to share thoughts about my work." I smiled at his careful approach. "That does sound nice, very convenient." His eyes crinkled with amusement. "Purely practical considerations, of course." "Of course," I agreed, squeezing his hand. "I think we could arrange something along those lines." By Sunday afternoon, the time had come to say my goodbyes. Thomas and Diana had returned for a final lunch with Zoe and me, the atmosphere between us noticeably warmer than on Friday. "We've been discussing some changes," Thomas told me as we finished our meal, "about our finances, our lifestyle priorities." "Oh?" I kept my tone neutral, encouraging rather than intrusive. "We're thinking of downsizing," Diana said, surprising me with her directness. "The house in Ridgewood is beautiful, but it's more than we need, and the maintenance costs are significant." "That sounds like a thoughtful decision," I said carefully. "What prompted this?" Thomas and Diana exchanged a glance. "Several things," Thomas admitted. "Conversations with Zoe about what really matters to her, reflections on what we've been working so hard to achieve, and frankly, Mom, seeing how content you are living simply while directing your resources toward meaningful impact. It's made us reconsider our priorities." The admission was unexpected and deeply moving. "I think it's important for each of us to find the balance that feels right," I said. "There's no single correct answer." "We know," Diana said, "but we're ready to explore some different questions than the ones that have guided us for the past 20 years. Zoe, who had been listening quietly, beamed with obvious approval. "I think it's great," she said. "And maybe you could redirect some of those resources toward your interior design business, Mom. You've always wanted to expand it." Diana's face lit up at her daughter's support. "That's actually part of the plan. A smaller house would allow me to invest more in the business, maybe take on an assistant." As the conversation continued, I marveled at the transformation taking place before my eyes. These weren't simply surface changes in spending habits or living arrangements, but deeper shifts in values and priorities. Whether these changes would endure remained to be seen, but the willingness to question long-held assumptions was itself significant. When the time came to say goodbye to Zoe, we stood outside her dormitory, neither quite ready for the moment of parting. "This weekend changed everything," she said, her eyes bright with emotion. "I feel like I really see you now, Grandma. And maybe myself too, in a different way." "I feel the same," I told her, pulling her into a hug. "And this is just the beginning. We have so much more to discover about each other." "You'll come back for Parents' Weekend?" she asked. "And Thanksgiving?" And yes, I laughed. "To all of it. Wild horses couldn't keep me away." Her smile was radiant. "Good, because I'm not letting you disappear into the background anymore. Westlake needs to know who you are. I need to know who you are. All of it. Not just the parts I thought I understood." The maturity and insight in her words filled me with pride. Whatever mistakes and misunderstandings had characterized our past relationship, the foundation we were building now felt solid and true. After final hugs with Thomas and Diana, warmer than any we had shared in years, I returned to the university, in to collect my belongings. James had offered to drive me back to Oak Ridge, an arrangement that would give us several hours of uninterrupted conversation. As we loaded my suitcase into his car, I took one last look at the Westlake campus spread before us. For years, it had been a place where I invested my resources but kept myself at a distance, separating my contribution from my identity. Now it had become something more, a community where I was known and valued, a place where my granddaughter was discovering her own path, a potential second home as I entered this new chapter of my life. The drive to Oak Ridge passed quickly, our conversation ranging from books we loved to places we hoped to visit, from childhood memories to hopes for the future. There was an ease between us that felt both familiar and fresh, the comfort of established friendship enriched by the exciting possibility of something more. As we approached my house, the modest home that had prompted Zoe's initial embarrassment, I saw it with new eyes. Not as a symbol of limitation or simplicity, but as a deliberate choice that reflected my values. The garden I had tended for years, the comfortable furniture arranged for reading and conversation, the photographs documenting a life of quiet, purpose. All of it was authentically mine in a way that a larger, more impressive house could never have been. James carried my suitcase to the door, then hesitated on the threshold. "I should get back to Westlake," he said. "Early class tomorrow." "Thank you for everything," I said, suddenly shy in this moment of parting. The drive, the company, the understanding. He smiled, the expression lighting his entire face. "I'll call you tomorrow," he promised. "And I'll see you next weekend? For dinner at that little French place I mentioned?" "I'd like that," I said, returning his smile. He leaned forward then, placing a gentle kiss on my lips, brief but full of promise. "Until then, Margaret." I watched his car disappear down the street, then turned to enter my home. Inside, everything was just as I had left it days ago, yet everything had changed. The photographs on my mantle, Gerald, Thomas as a child, Zoe, through the years, seemed to hold new meaning, the tangible record of a family evolving through joy and struggle, connection and distance, misunderstanding and reconciliation. Moving to my desk, I opened my laptop and began composing a new email, not to Dr. Hayes this time, but to Thomas and Diana. In it, I outlined a proposal for a family foundation that would allow us to combine our resources for philanthropic impact, while respecting each person's individual priorities and values. Not a takeover or rescue, but a genuine partnership that acknowledged our different strengths and perspectives. As I worked, I felt a deep sense of rightness, of things falling into place after years of careful compartmentalization. My granddaughter had called me embarrassing, not knowing I was her college's biggest donor, but in that moment of misunderstanding, had been the seed of something valuable. The opportunity to be fully seen and known, not just as a grandmother or a benefactor, but as a complete human being with choices, values, and a unique contribution to make. Outside my window, the sun was setting over Oak Ridge, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. I thought of Zoe in her dormitory room, perhaps working on another story, of Thomas and Diana discussing their plans for change, of James driving back to Westlake with thoughts of our next meeting brightening his journey. And I thought of Gerald, who had always encouraged me to live boldly and authentically. "Life's too short for pretense, Maggie," he used to say. "Be who you are, give what you can, love without reservation." After years of giving anonymously, I was finally learning to give the most valuable gift of all, my true self, with all its complexity and wisdom, vulnerability and strength. And in that giving, I was receiving more than I had ever imagined possible. I finished the email to Thomas and Diana, then closed my laptop with a sense of completion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, new conversations and adjustments. But tonight I was simply grateful for second chances and new beginnings, for the courage to be seen, and for the unexpected joy of discovering that even at 70, life could still unfold in surprising and beautiful ways. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.